Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. This Thursday marks President Lee Jae Myung's 30th day in office. 1 month in, he's setting a notably open tone for the presidency. From declaring himself the president for all to rolling out the people's nomination system and launching the people's mailbox, President Lee has placed citizen engagement at the heart of his early governance. With emergency economic measures also underway, his administration is signaling speed, visibility, and direct response. But as these symbolic moves begin to meet institutional reality, the question now is whether this participatory model can truly take root and what it means for the future of Korean democracy. In our first installment, marking the 1-month anniversary of Lee Jae Myung's presidency, we take a closer look at Lee's style of governance, how it's unfolding, what it promises, and where it may be headed. For this, we are joined in the studio by Kim Mo, professor at the Department of Public Administration at Konkuk University. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
And also joining us online is Lee Hyun, Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School. Welcome, Professor.
It's a pleasure to be back on the program.
So let's begin a discussion with Professor Kim. Let's go back to, President Lee's inaugural promise. He declared himself the president for all, and he also vowed to, break with divisive politics in the nation. How would you evaluate, Professor, the administration's, latest symbolic weight of that statement, president for all?
Yes, as you mentioned earlier, during first months, President Lee has made a lot of decisions. And among them, as we observe from his cabinet appointment, his governance philosophy of capacity, integration, and balancing were emphasized, which means his inaugural promise were reflected. So as we look at closer, for example, Minister of Science and Technology is an example of emphasizing capacity and practical orientation. He's from LGAI Institute. Also, Minister of Small and Medium Enterprise is from NAVER. And Minister of Health is former Commissioner of Disease Control and Prevention Agency. Likewise, so he is emphasizing practicality and capacity. And regarding integration, he selected 8 people from the ruling party. So that's a way to grab the control of the governance in some ways. And more importantly, balancing and also respecting the legacy of policies. For example, Minister of Patriots and Veteran Service. This person is from Hanara Party, which is the predecessor party to the People's Power Party right now. Also, Minister of Food and Drug Agency and Minister of Agriculture are from Yoon administration as well. Also, Minister of Industry, Trade and Environment has ample experience of nuclear power plant export in the past. So in one word, he is trying to coordinate his philosophy well at the moment.
Right. Professor, thank you so much for giving us a clear picture of, President Lee's latest picks on ministerial positions. So speaking of which, the people's nomination system has been introduced for the first time, and citizens are to, recommend top officials for their posts. From a public administration view, how feasible and effective do you think this, real personnel suggestion system is?
Yeah, the meaning of this system is any new government, it would face the same issue of positioning the right person at the right place. And the existing way of doing that includes using Ministry of Personnel Management database, also utilizing political network, including shadow cabinet, shadow think tank, shadow camp, and also informal recommendations. But this way, President Lee's policy is adding new layer. But this way has pros and cons. The good point first, as I mentioned, adding new layer, trying to overcoming existing way of recruiting. Secondly, it is gaining justification for policy by borrowing strengths from the referred person, usually well-known, high-profile, icon-like person. For example, if somebody recommends Surgeon Lee Guk-jong as health minister, that could be the example. But the dark side of this is first, an expert in one field may prove to be incapable, not necessarily with his or her capability, but people will easily equalize policy failure to that person's character or capacity. So that's one problem. Secondly, this recommendation process or system may go within this small and limited group of fans, not going beyond the general public. So that's one problem. So one metaphor I can use is to compare commercial strategy between Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Coca-Cola has been known to be relying on timeless storyline, whereas Pepsi has been relying on celebrity strategy. The relying on celebrity strategy is weak because if there are a lot of people who do not like that celebrity, they will not buy Pepsi. And likewise, those people who do not like that referred person will not give favor to the policy that this then minister is making. So at this moment, this is an early stage of implementation, I have to say.
Mm-hmm. So though it has shown a lot of fairness, there still could be some downsides since it's too early to, judge. Now, let's also touch upon the legal point of this, Professor Lee. The system promised transparency and fairness, the latest system, the nomination system, of course. But under the current laws governing presidential appointments, how binding do you think are these public sourced recommendations, and where do legal constraints actually begin?
Right. So the bottom line is these nominations from the public are not legally binding, right? They're mostly a kind of a political sort of a initiative by the the administration now, to basically have more participation from the people in terms of leadership and with respect to different ministries, vice minister positions, right, high-level officials within the Korean government. But I mean, formally speaking, when it comes to actual nominations as well as selection, right, that's usually at the power of the president. The president, of course, has the power to nominate, and with the exception of, let's say, the prime minister, the president's ability to nominate and then appoint someone in a position of leadership at a ministry, like, let's say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for instance, or Defense, really it lays at the power of the president. So with the exception of the prime minister, which then requires, of course, National Assembly consent and voting, with that exception, the president has the exclusive sort of jurisdiction there. So when it comes to the people now coming into play in terms of making suggestions, as Professor Kim noted, there's pros and cons to that. But from a legal perspective, really, there's no legally binding force that any of this has with respect to the nomination process, as well as the eventual sort of appointment of those officials, because from the constitutional perspective, that power lays exclusively with the president of the country.
Mm-hmm. So that legal distinction really helps clarify what's symbolic and what's structural at this point. Now, Professor Kim, soon after this, President Lee has also launched the so-called People's Mailbox, where citizens can actually directly submit questions online. And according to the presidential office, all submissions are reported to President Lee, and he would personally respond to important ones, significant ones. As a public participation tool, how would you assess this real potential to shape governance, this latest system?
Okay. Currently, we have similar system called e-people, or 신문고, literally meaning drums for the people. And this mailbox, People's Mailbox, is a much advanced, refined system in the sense that president is expected to respond to that. So we can expect two things. one, both this e-people and this people's mailbox is a way to transmit complaint to the top officials, including president. That's one. Secondly, from government point of view, it's possible to extract potentially important policy ideas from hidden valleys. By hidden valleys, I mean existing media or any communication channel because of its capacity limits and also some sort of limitation in collecting and filtering. So there are voices that could not be heard from president's point of view in any country. And this way of people's mailbox may alleviate that issue. But there's a caveat, that is, this should be used as an auxiliary mechanism. That is, if this is overused, then existing ways of collecting and distilling and transmitting ideas will be weakened or withered. So there should be a fine balance between the two.
Mm-hmm. We have to, look at what's the real balance between the actual process that has been made before and also the new process right now. Now, this platform replaced the previous, public petition board as well. Professor Lee, from a constitutional rights perspective, does this more filtered model, or should I say, still respect citizens' right to petition and the need for, transparent dialogue?
Right. So this has to be understood in the context of, Article 26 of the Korean Constitution, which states basically that the citizens have the right to petition in writing to the government or government agency as prescribed by law. And so there's a specific law in Korea called the Petition Act. And that Petition Act basically outlines the procedures by which people, ordinary people, citizens, can then submit a petition to the government, and the government, depending on the kind of petition, has to respond. So now the question becomes now, with respect to this new system, the People's Mailbox, as you mentioned, really goes to the questions about whether and how the filtering process will be with respect to messages or petitions that are submitted to the president. Now, of course, the president won't literally read every single message that's submitted through this platform. So there's obviously going to be some amount of filtering with respect to how certain kinds of messages get to the president, because someone's going to have to read them and make a decision as to how to categorize that petition or message to the president. So I think it really depends on the filtering process with respect to how these messages can get to the president and how then the president responds. So I think the big question really, I think in part is, with respect to filtering, is what the process by which you, let's say, reject certain kinds of messages that are sent to the president, because of course, again, not everything will get to the president himself. And so the concern here is the filtering mechanism, is it going to be arbitrary? What principles are going to be applied with respect to these kinds of messages? I mean, that really is the big question. And of course, transparency. With respect to actually making decisions as to these kinds of messages that are submitted to the president, then is the process for deciding those messages and petitions, how transparent will it be, and what criteria and principles will the Blue House use when it comes to these kinds of messages to the president? So I think that's where the big concern will be as a result of, as a matter of law, to be consistent with the constitutional provisions as well as existing law like the Petition Act. I think that remains to be seen. So I think as this plays out, we'll see more and more, I think, how this will be actually implemented and then make a determination going forward.
Mm-hmm. So a very clear guideline would be necessary in terms of, the filtering process moving forward. Now, let's move on to President Lee's town hall meeting, Professor Kim, in Gwangju. Personally, he listened to local concerns like the stalled military airport relocation. Do you think this kind of could this be a model for localized, citizen-driven governance moving forward, this kind of town hall meeting?
Yeah, it was positive, but there are pros and cons. Moving airports in downtown areas is one of the toughest policy issues to pursue. And in the sense that President's remark resolved the stalemate issue and let the process moving on, that was a contribution. But if somebody asks me whether this could be generalizable or could be a model, I would be quite cautious because other airport issues and other urban, complex urban issues, they have their own context. And the fact that they have been there as a stalemate for several years means they require very highly refined ways of resolution, not just simple model. So instead of saying generalizable model, I think it was a very nice attempt to break the stalemate. That was the contribution in this case.
Right, so that kind of hands-on style could reshape how local demands are handled, but we'll really have to see how it goes moving forward. Now, staying with this Gwangju initiative, Professor Lee, President Lee has ordered a 6-party government local task force to mediate the airport dispute. Legally speaking, how clear is this framework for such a ad hoc coordination bodies, and could there be risks of overreach, jurisdictional overreach?
Sure. I mean, I think it's clear that the president has the authority by executive order to create these ad hoc bodies. In this case, this coordination body, as you mentioned, basically, a task force that has local officials as well as, ministerial level, national leaders, ministerial level people to get involved in terms of determining, this particular question. But, when it comes to just the issues itself with respect to how this is implemented, that's another question because as you sort of referred to in your question, the question of jurisdictional overreach, I think, is a real concern because when it comes to these kinds of issues like an airport, I mean, there are obviously, lines of authority when it comes to decision making with respect to these kinds of domestic issues. So, for instance, when it comes to ministerial authority, it's very clear, right, that the ministry, that the relevant ministry has the power to enact, for example, regulations or, drive certain initiatives when it comes to, certain kinds of matters. And there's, of course, established procedures that have already been set in place by law and statute. So, the concern is maybe if you had an ad hoc body or coordination body, that body can't make, let's say, independent decision making and move the process along by itself. So that's the concern really is if the ad hoc body makes decisions as to merely coordinating between, different ministries as well as, local officials. And then, the other concern will be, with respect to these executive ad hoc bodies is, does it undermine local autonomy? Because, there's always a push and pull between the central government and local officials when it comes to, issues like an airport or anything else that matters that pertain to local matters. And so I think that's really the big question here is, while, as Professor Kim noted, this is a good attempt sort of push the stalemate, right? The question now is, when it comes to the implementation and the workings of such a body, then you'll have to look at, what this actual body does, and will it sort of supplant, existing sort of legislative, statutory, sort of regulatory bodies that have legal authority to make decisions. And so if this is seen as being sort of overreach, I think you're going to see, potential lawsuits, right, and other complaints that then I think may undermine the whole effort to bring in these ad hoc bodies into existence.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we conclude our discussion, Professor Kim, looking back on President Lee's past month, he's been repeatedly framing, his presidency as a turning point for real democracy and citizen-centered governance. So in practical terms, what does that actually look like? And what signs should we watch for the coming months and years ahead?
Yes, and in today's panel, together with Professor Lee, we have found that in actual policy decisions, President Lee, based on his own vision, his own version of real democracy and participation, he should try to implement that in real terms. In the cabinet appointment, for example, Labor Minister was former National Railroad worker head, and also he tried to recruit people from relatively underrepresented sectors and segments for the cabinet members. Also, people's mailbox and the public referral system was a fresh idea, still yet to be refined. So in the months to come, we'll have to watch this new institution systems moving on, refined. And one word summary will be these new systems are still at the testing the water stage right now. We'll be watching positively.
So definitely a lot of things to discuss with the latest changes by the new government, but let's hope for supportive measures to, address these kinds of concerns that we have right now. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion for tonight at this point, but thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Professor Kim.
Thank you.
And Professor Lee, of course, we appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having me on the program.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.